Hey there, welcome back to the Energy Blueprint podcast. Here with me for the third time is my good friend and specialist in viral immunity, Dr. J.E. Williams. He is a highly respected integrative medicine clinician who treats and revitalizes patients in even the most severe stages of illness. He's been in practice for about 35 years and has a whopping 150,000 patient visits over those 35 years. He also has been treating chronic fatigue syndrome for much of that time, if not all of that time, and he has just an amazing level of expertise in both chronic fatigue and in particular infections. And so what better time to have him on than in the midst of this pandemic to talk about viral immunity. So welcome back to the show for the third time, Dr. Williams.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. So first of all, let's talk about this idea that you told me about via email, which is bending the curve. So people are familiar with the idea of flattening the curve. There's some misconceptions around that, which maybe we can get into. But what's the difference between flattening the curve and bending the curve?
Yeah, bending the curve is proactively being involved in your own care. So that's avoidance, prevention, treatment if you should get sick. So you can bend it away from becoming more severe or killing you or killing someone that you know are one of your loved ones. So, and that has to, instead of just flattening like that or smoothing it out and extending it out, you're actually shifting that. You're putting a tangent to it, a positive twist to the process. And the other thing is that we and several other countries have effectively flattened the curve, but we've extended it out, right? What we don't really know is that it?
Mm-hmm.
And
yeah.
Probably not.
That's the main misconception that I was getting at, which is, there, and part of it is it's not just people's misinterpretation. It's that there were many people presenting this inaccurately at the outset of the pandemic, where they were saying, here's how many people will get this and die. 2 million people were some of the projections, for example, from Neil Ferguson. If we don't flatten the curve, and then if we do flatten the curve, it's only 150,000 will die. And the reality of flattening the curve was never that it dramatically changes the total number of infections. It's that it's the same area under the curve, same total number of infections, just spread out over a longer period of time. So I think that's one inaccuracy, but there's also this idea, so that's in people's heads, that if by flattening the curve and slowing the spread, this thing will just go away, on its own, and we can prevent ourselves from getting it. And maybe you can comment on that. But my perception is that bending the curve, what you're talking about here, is really what should be a major focus, and yet is almost being completely ignored. So
right, exactly. Not only almost completely ignored, but pushed aside and focused on drug sales and money making and just completely the wrong attitude about the epidemic disease. So what they misunderstand is exactly what you're saying, is that flattening curve is just prevents a peak infection so that the system is not overwhelmed.
Mhm.
Hospitals and however, they were overwhelmed anyway in certain parts of the country, but not maximally overwhelmed. Not only were they overwhelmed, but we weren't prepared. But why weren't we prepared? Those of us who are in the field have known this for forever, and certainly since the first SARS epidemic 20 years ago, that coronavirus was coming. So not to have face masks, for example, and then run out of them, and not to be able to get them, that just doesn't make any sense whatsoever in the United States. Mm-hmm. And then when you flatten that curve, what's really next is, what is that flattened curve look like? And how long does it extend out? And that, as you were saying, you're going to get the same amount of infections and same amount of deaths. Maybe you're going to get more infections and maybe more deaths over time. But is that curve really a stamp and down, slow, kind of like a mushroom, just sitting in the field and then getting limper and limper and limper and then going away? I don't think so. First of all, we don't know anything really about how this particular coronavirus uh, is going to play out. Nobody knows because it's a new infection. We have an idea, but we really don't know. And what we're looking at now is, will it become endemic, permanent, so that when you get sick of respiratory illness, say 6 months from now or 6 years from now, when you go to your doctor's office, they'll test you for coronavirus and influenza and a few other things like that. But is that going to be a serious consequence? Will chronic fatigue cases increase? There's so many questions of that. So what you can do, what I teach my patients and what I help them do and my readers, is to bend that curve away from the troubling effects, right?
I want to get to that, and there's so many nuances around the flattening the curve thing, and it's obviously been heavily politicized. There's a right-left divide around it.
Sure.
There's a public policy debate. There's a lot of complexities to it. The public health fallout of economic devastation and unemployment, as far as suicides and deaths of despair and things like that, versus how many lives you could potentially save by extending the curve, flattening the curve, and maybe theoretically coming up with better treatment. There's, I just read an article yesterday talking about how many children are projected to die in Africa as a result of interruptions in the food chain supply, because of global lockdowns and things like that. So it's so complex. It's such a complex system when you just shut down the world, basically. And I think we were looking at things so myopically, as far as like, let's avoid hospital overwhelm, that we didn't pay enough attention to what are all of the potential massive consequences that could result from flattening the curve. So it's a very complex debate, but there is one aspect of it that I would like to get your opinion on, since you just mentioned it, which is masks. What do you think as far as the evidence is concerned about mask wearing, at the population level, for hours every day? People wearing these masks in their homes or outside their homes as they go for walks, in the workplace, in the car, hours and hours and hours on a daily basis. I've seen kind of both sides of this. What's your take on this? Do you perceive this
Right.
as
So this coronavirus it moves similar like to influenza on droplets of sputum or in your tears, or and it's not floating around the air like they used anthrax, for example, as a bioterrorism. And it probably would be very difficult to make a coronavirus into a real bioterrorist weapon where you could blow it across a battlefield or something like that, or blow it into a city. But that's what people are afraid of, and they think that it's in the air. It's not floating around the air. Therefore, wearing a mask all the time doesn't make any sense. And also, it's hard to breathe. If you have a really effective mask, N95, they're hard to breathe in. So you should wear the mask when you're in public, when you're shopping, and going into your building if you're still at work, for example. But wearing it all the time doesn't make any sense, and may be bad for your health.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. What's interesting to me is the cloth mask, like the homemade mask issue. I've looked, and there's almost no evidence at all on the use of cloth masks in the context of infections. There's one study I think it was from Vietnam, and they compared 3 different groups. One was wearing medical masks, one was wearing cloth masks, and one was standard practice, which involved some bit of mask wearing, but much less mask wearing. In other words, much more time with no mask on compared to the other 2 groups. And what they found is that the wearing of the cloth mask, and this is among healthcare workers, I think nurses in a hospital setting, the wearing of the cloth mask was associated with higher rates of influenza-like illness and infection compared with both of the other groups. So my takeaway from this was, if you are going to wear a mask, I think the only thing that probably makes sense is medical mask wearing, true medical masks, not the homemade cloth masks. Is that something you would agree with?
Yeah, that's correct. One of the things that misconception is that people see pictures of China and Korea, and you see streets full of people wearing masks. Even without the coronavirus, you still see them wearing masks. I've been to China, as you know, multiple times since the early 1980s, and people wear masks there because they are packed so tightly together. You're walking on a big street. This is everywhere, and except out in the countryside, and you're shoulder to shoulder. There's a person in front of you, and there's a person in back of you, 6 inches, 12 inches, and one person coughs, and they're just moving around. That's not an unusual congestion because of their escaping a building or going to a soccer game or something. That's a normal life there. And so you see people wearing masks, and they have a reason to do that. So, but we're not packed like that in most of the time. And also the cloth masks, they not only the droplets will build up on the outside, and so you should have multiple cloth masks, and they should be going into hot water washing or some type of into the microwave to sterilize them, and changing masks all the time, if that's all you have.
Gotcha. So just to wrap that thought up, do you think that people should be wearing masks apart from any setting where they're like crammed together in close?
Absolutely. I think that this COVID-19 is changing our way of life forever. We and Europe and South America, and it will be more like Asia now. And that means, and I've talked about this for probably 30, 40 years, bowing is good. Shaking hands in this era, no.
Gotcha.
Wearing having masks on hand, having them in your briefcase, having them in your car, I think is going to be permanent for us. And I've done it for for years and decades, and that's how we do it.
Okay, so just to wrap up your thoughts there, so you think medical masks over cloth masks?
That's right, medical masks. The N95s, there's different versions of the N95. You can get simpler versions, and not the respirator type that somebody working in a lot of dust or something would wear, and they're easier, they're less expensive, and yeah, that's the type you should be wearing. The surgical mask helps a little bit, but that still can get in along the sides.
Got it.
Here's what you should do when you buy your mask. Of course, there's a lot of fake N95s. When it comes in, put some water into that mask. A few drops of water and into the inside. And if it holds the water, you're good.
And then, so as far as mask wearing habits, let's say someone gets a true medical mask like an N95, you're saying no need to wear it when you're out and about, if I'm not correct, and that, but only in like indoor settings in close quarters with other people.
Well, not just indoor. Say you're parking and going to the grocery store or something, or you're moving or you're going to the post office or something. You probably want to wear that as you get out of your car. You don't know who you're going to bump into along the way and as you're going in. So don't put it on in there, but put it on from your car to those places. Or,
Yeah.
if you're
Nice.
that you don't need to wear it at the beach, but a good idea to have one in a little bag or in your pocket. Say you arrive and say, I'm going to go there early or late, and all of a sudden there's a big crowd of people, and you got to maybe having a picnic and you need to move through them. Then you don your mask, move through them. If there's nobody on the beach, you take it off.
Okay. And so basically any scenario where you're in close quarters with lots of other people.
That's right. And don't forget that washing your hands is really important too, cleaning your hands. So in my car, I have masks and multiple ones because I tend to lose them and forget about them. And then, give them away. I always have a package of new ones for people who need them. And then a hand sanitizer, some wipes, and
Got
and then when you get home, wash your hands.
Okay. And any concern with wearing this too long during the day as far as decreased O2 or increased CO2 levels in the blood?
Yeah, that's what I think. A good mask doesn't allow water out. That means the droplets that you may be coughing or sneezing, or the droplets coming in, and they don't let out, which means they don't let air also in. So if you wear those masks like I do, after 30 minutes or so, you find it a little bit hard to breathe. It gets a little bit warm underneath those masks, and it's not. So that's another reason.
Yeah. I did see one study that was talking about large increase in the incidence of headaches in nurses wearing medical masks N95s, and they were attributing it specifically to hypercapnia, high CO2 levels, and decreased O2 levels, or just increased resistance of the gas exchange with
You're
breathing.
rebreathing your own air,
Mhm.
and you're breathing out carbon dioxide. So you're rebreathing some of that carbon dioxide back in, and you're getting some ambient air from the outside in. But
So is it possible? Is there some element of you know there's a benefit of decreasing the spread of the virus. And at the same time, potentially, if you wear these masks too much, you may be stressing your body in a way that might theoretically decrease your immunity to a small extent.
right, you have think of it as a continuum. So at one end, or a line like this, at one end is uh, people are coughing and sneezing. You're going into everything's closed now. So, but say, for example, you're going to the airport or going to a hotel or you're going into this grocery store. And just at that moment, there's a lot of people going in too, and one of those is sick, but they don't know it, and so that mask is going to help you then, right? But after you get home, there's nobody, unless somebody is sick at home, then you need to wear a mask in the house.
Mhm.
But if you're at home alone or nobody's sick, then you don't need to wear that mask, and you have to breathe normally. It's important to have good respiratory function,
Got it.
and right,
Okay.
and yep, exactly, and don't think that this is over. This is going to go on for months and many more months. And and if you can have a supply of masks, if there's you can get them, and if not, this type of living is going to go on for forever now. I think the world is just too small a place. There's too many people. In fact, these type of infections are spreading too much. So get enough of masks. Don't hoard thousands of masks, but have 50 or a few hundred.
Sure. So, um, bigger picture context of mask wearing and social distancing and lockdowns. The original whole premise of lockdowns and social distancing was flatten the curve, as we said, to prevent hospital overwhelm.
Spread out the infections.
Right. We've already successfully flattened the curve, and there's no hospital overwhelm issue at this point. I don't know, maybe one or two hospitals in New York might have an issue still, but I think 99% of the country and almost the world, as far as I'm aware, maybe with the exception of a few hot spots, have no issue of hospital overwhelm. given that, what is the benefit of flattening the curve or slowing the spread now? What are we accomplishing in the big picture at the population level by doing that?
Versus just going back, just opening everything and going back to normal?
Sure. There's some people, for example, epidemiologist Newt Witkowski, who have argued that the way to end this is to allow it to spread, to get herd immunity, such that you can be done with it and get back to normal. So, and then on the other hand, it seems, I mean, outside of hospital overwhelm, it seems like now that we've avoided that, the argument has shifted more towards we want to extend the duration of this and hopefully find a treatment or a vaccine that allows us to get back to normal. But what in your mind is sort of the most compelling argument for mask wearing and slowing the spread?
Well, the author and one of the top writers in the field of infectious disease, David Kornman, he said that every new pandemic starts as a mystery. So that's the way we need to approach it. So an intelligent person and a professional, medical professional should be approaching it, and I know that they do when we're talking in private, but they present to the public as if it were as simple as what you were just talking about. It's not that simple. That's not how it works. But people have a hard time with uncertainty. And so you give them something certain. You're looking for something certain. You give them a curve that goes like this, and you give them a curve that goes like that. And then you ask questions, or you talk about, herd immunity and think, we don't know. Nobody knows. The experts do not know. Mm-hmm. Right. So that means that we should still continue to be careful.
Careful just to, as individuals, to decrease our personal susceptibility.
That's right. That's right. So for example, in my case, our clinic has stayed open. We have not treated a single person with COVID-19 infection. That's not our type of patients. But we screen it. People come into the building. We screen them. We take their temperature. We have a list. I developed a whole protocol for that. We don't let them into the clinic until we screen them. And if any of our employees have had the slightest possibility of contact, we send them home. We haven't had a single employee test positive. And though we've sent home 2 to 4 of them over the last several months, after 5, we do it 5 days, 10 days, 15 days, and we let them back in. But this is not over. This is not a flu. This is not a seasonal flu or even a bad flu that goes up and down and over, and you have the herd immunity, and the vaccine helps a little bit, and so forth like that. This is not what we're dealing with.
So what's different? What's different about this compared to that?
Well, first of all, it's not a seasonal virus, although it may have seasonal tendencies. Second, it has a potential to have higher infection rates. So MERS was 30% death rate, and SARS, the original SARS, was 10% death rate. And people die very badly. You can't breathe. Your lungs fill up with fluid. It's a really frightening condition. And with the seasonal flu, it comes with a darker, colder weather and less sun and indoor heating, and it goes away when the sun starts. Ultraviolet light comes out. So the two are different. They're different types of viruses. We know a lot about influenza, but not everything. We know almost nothing about coronavirus, and this virus is mutating. So we don't know what it's doing, but we do know that there's multiple different strains and that those are mutating. It's possible that it could mutate into a SARS-1 type of infection where their death rate all of a sudden goes up to 10% or 20%. So I think we should be individually and as a society careful and cautious.
Gotcha.
And even when we, for over at least the next several months. And if we see the natural curve going down and going down without intervention, then I think we can start to return to a semblance of normal. But I don't think we'll ever be normal again. We're going to have
this will circulate every year, kind of like the flu does.
It's this virus is everywhere, and if it's not this one, it'll be another one.
Okay. So, okay.
We need to change our behavior and bow instead of handshake, and namaste, more California namastes, and we need to have some masks on hand, and we need to keep our hygiene, like more like Asian people do.
Gotcha.
And then what I'm talking about is bending the curve. So that means, what can you do? Don't wait till you're sick and end up in the hospital, or what can you do now for prevention? How can you manage your immunity? How can you support your thymus gland? And then if you do get sick, what do you need to do? And and then after sick, you're not going to be just free of this illness. If you get sick, we don't know that yet. And we're seeing consequences of people who have been sick showing up already. So better to do a kind of, post-infection cycle of substance and nutritional substances as well.
Okay, I want to get there. Let me ask you first, what is your take on vaccines? And, there's a lot of people under the impression that are kind of like the only thing that can save me is if, when the vaccine comes out, there are people hiding in their homes right now who refuse to come out until there's a vaccine available. Bill Gates is coming out and saying the only way we can get back to normal is when we have a vaccine. Trump is now in Operation Warp Speed to develop a vaccine. Everybody's got their focus here. As we said at the outset, nobody's talking about bending the curve, but people are focused, it seems, exclusively on the pursuit of this vaccine that's going to save us. My personal perception of that is, hey, if we develop a vaccine, it happens to be wonderfully safe and effective, great. However, what I see is really unrealistic expectations in the context that I see is like, there's so many viruses we've been trying to develop a vaccine for years or decades unsuccessfully. Common cold viruses. We have the flu virus that has, over the last 14 years, about a 40% efficacy. Flu still goes around every single year despite having a vaccine and 50% of the population getting the vaccine. It's not even clear if there's a really significant effect size from the vaccine as far as reducing hospitalizations. There was a Cochrane review from 2010, 2018, talking about that. And, and then the past history of coronaviruses vaccines seems to have all failed. And in some cases in animal testing has resulted in antibody dependent enhancement, where the vaccinated animals actually had worse reactions when subsequently exposed to the real virus and died due to cytokine storms. So I think, my perception of all of that is like, it seems somewhat unrealistic to me to imagine we're going to have a remarkably effective and safe vaccine, in a year from now. But I'm curious what your take is on that, and this idea that we can only get back to normal when we have a vaccine.
Well, we have to get back to normal, but it has to be a new normal. Part of what I was just talking about.
Mm-hmm. Gotcha.
And second is we're circling back to uncertainty. So give the public something certain. We're working on a vaccine. The vaccine is going to help us get back to normal. We're not going to ever get back to normal. Things are going to improve. Things are going to be better, but it's going to be a change. It's going to be a new better. And coronavirus is here, and we're going to learn about that over time. A vaccine takes a long time to develop and then prove to be safe, and that, except for the smallpox vaccine and the polio vaccine, most vaccines have not proven to be that super effective, and also have consequences, and also have potential for bioterrorism, and so there's not we don't want to develop vaccines for every microbe on the planet. That doesn't make any sense. And for the coronavirus, since it's mutating and there's multiple types of them, which coronavirus are we making a vaccine for? The COVID-2, which is the one that causes COVID-19 disease, but will that COVID-2 be the same? Probably not. You know, we've already had COVID-1, MERS, and now COVID-2, and many others, but those are the three main ones. So will we have COVID-15? We have a vaccine for COVID-2 2 years from now, or 4 years or 10 years from now, but maybe COVID-2 will have changed to COVID-15.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that we have to become stronger and become more proactive and take the power back into our own hands. And yes, support the research for a vaccine, but it's not going to come quickly, and it may not be that effective. If it does, it might, but probably not.
Are you worried about this new technology of mRNA vaccines and the safety risks?
Yeah, exactly. Anytime you, anytime you poke something into somebody, you have potential for harm and immune disruption, and there's nobody really knows. But I'm for wise use of vaccines. I'm more pro better public health, more intelligent approaches to infectious disease control and things like that, and wise use or moderate use or strategic use of vaccines.
Gotcha. So let's get into immunity and bending the curve on an individual level. And let's talk about prevention first. So at this point, we're in mid-May as we're recording this. We've had, whatever it is, 12 weeks or so that we've been all, thinking about this, obsessed with it, learning about it. Studies have come out. Some things that were proposed early on, maybe haven't panned out as predicted. Other things have come. There's hydroxychloroquine, remdesivir, all these things. And then simultaneously, you have in a lot of the mainstream media, you have certain professionals that have come out and said, this whole idea that we could, quote unquote, boost our immune system is nonsense. And there's this whole effort by some people in the mainstream, conventional medicine, mainstream media that are trying to quote unquote debunk the idea that vitamins and minerals and herbs could possibly have any impact on immune function, or that nutrition and lifestyle impact it, which I think is absurd and is criminal that they're promoting a narrative like that. But let's talk about prevention first, and then maybe segue into treatment, or you can pair them together as much as you want. But what are your thoughts on the key ways that people can avoid maybe severe sickness?
Well, first we talked about avoidance. So wearing a mask, washing your hands, things like that. So that's number one. If you don't get exposed, you won't get sick. If you were living on a small island in the Caribbean and nobody came over there, no ships came into port, no canoes came by, and no mail arrived, and you and your family were there, you wouldn't get sick.
But to me, this seems a bit unrealistic. If you're in the modern world, if you're living in a city, it seems to me like we're all going to get exposed. And
that's right. That's right. So eventually, the idea we were talking about earlier is, some people say it's better if everybody does get exposed, but a little bit over time, and then we'll develop herd immunity. But that sounds very sweet and nice, and may not be biologically 100% accurate. The next is so avoidance is one, and then prevention is two, and prevention and avoidance overlap a little bit. So and I advocate for early interaction based on your symptoms and being well prepared at home. So no, this is in March and April, you couldn't get the little device that clips on your finger.
Oximeter, pulse oximeter.
That's right. And that we use all day long in our office. And it gives you an estimate of your percentage of oxygen. But everybody should have one of those. And everybody should have a thermometer. In the old fashioned days, I'm sure your mom had a thermometer that she shook down and put it under your tongue every time you didn't feel good. People used to do that. And for some reason, we, in our mid-generation, we lost that kind of touch with that. Things were not so bad. The vaccines seemed to work for a lot of things, and medical care was not too bad, you know. And so we did. How many people had glass thermometers anymore? Almost nobody. But you should have an infrared thermometer, an oximeter, and a blood pressure cuff too at home. And during this epidemic, you should be testing yourself every day. So, and
You think pulse oximeter is the decreased oxygenation of the blood, is that an early symptom or a late symptom?
it could be an early symptom too, but you should not know what your standard level is. So a younger person like yourself should be about 98 or 99%. A person in their, say, 55 to 65 or 70, they may be 96 to 98%. But everybody, including young people, and if they can't breathe well, that number is going to go down. So that's one of the first things that happens, is that you develop a fever, so your body is responding to that. It's affecting your respiratory tract, and that's going to your oxygen is going to go down, and you may not have a lot of other symptoms. So the idea is to can you manage and catch early symptoms? If you can, you're ahead of the curve.
Okay.
And you have the opportunity to bend the curve.
So
now for prevention, what you said was the nutrients help, especially if you're deficient. So there's not a single researcher, scientist, or physician who's going to say that if a person is zinc deficient, that their immunity is normal. So most of us have enough, but some of us don't have quite enough. So we run a little bit borderline deficient, but some people, depending on their diet, could actually be zinc deficient. But we also don't know really what that level of zinc, which is necessary for the thymus to work good, and the thymus makes the T cells, the T lymphocytes, which are first line of defense against infection. So the idea is if you take a megadose of zinc, that it gives you some type of magical superpowers. That's not correct, because your body will disperse that zinc, and also too much is toxic, right? So but having enough is important, and having enough every day is important.
Gotcha.
And right.
Okay. So let's say someone is monitoring their temperature, is monitoring their blood oxygenation status, maybe also their blood pressure. They're catching something early on. What should they do then if they feel like they're coming down with something?
Well, that's a time when they start to do what I call the supportive care. So that's when first, in the beginning, we didn't have any testing. Even now, the testing's not very good. And I have not chose a test to run it for all of our staff and myself. Even the one from LabCorp is not FDA approved. It says right on the form, this test is not the antibody test. But what I want to antibody test is IgG, IgM, and IgA, if I can, because that's going to tell me a little bit of insight into the mucosal membrane effect. So, and then I want not just a qualitative, I want a quantitative. So I want to know what level of IgG is in the blood, not just positive or negative. And just like when we measure for Epstein-Barr, as you know, you can tell that the level of the IgG there. So if it's in a relatively normal range, then or moderately, then probably is not playing a role as a persistent infection in that case of chronic fatigue. But if it's super elevated, very, very likely it is. But we don't have those tests yet for coronavirus. We will, but not right now. So getting tested is important. I don't have a recommendation, unfortunately. So, but we do tell patients to. Now, if you can't just go to LabCorp. I can't order a test for a patient because the LabCorp will not accept them in their office to test them. They want you to do it in your office and then send the blood over to them. But not every doctor's draw blood in their office. So you're left with getting the swab in your car at the, at a drive-through testing site. It's a real mess. So getting tested is important. Following those symptoms is important. Increasing making sure you're already taking vitamin C, zinc, and selenium are important. But then you should start picking up your beta glucan and then as anti-inflammatories like cat's claw, uncaria, as Chinese herbs like scutellaria, and then as you move through the process, then your antioxidants, because you have a lot of tissue damage, even in moderate illness. And of course, please keep up your fluids, manage fever, stay away from, try not to infect anybody else.
Gotcha. So as far as antioxidants, what would be your specific recommendations?
Well, vitamin C, zinc, selenium, and vitamin C are antioxidants. So making sure that you're dosing appropriately and frequently. So once a day is not enough. You have to do multiple 4 or 5 times a day, but low dose. The zinc stays in the body a little bit longer, but vitamin C, you need to do it maybe every 4 hours. There's also the, controversy about IV vitamin C, but from what I've read and knowing the Chinese studies, that vitamin C IV helps. Oral vitamin C helps. It doesn't cure. It's not a shield to prevent or to treat serious illness, but in integrative therapies, it shortens the time you're sick, and it can prevent the most severe symptoms. Gotcha. It's not 100%, but it does help. All of these other substances help. Now, also the luteolin and resveratrol, and then anti-inflammatories like curcumin and uncaria from cat's claw.
I've seen some research. Actually, there's a researcher up in Canada looking at, I think he just got like $1 million or $2 million to study quercetin to treat COVID-19.
That's right.
Quercetin and many other phytochemicals, possibly things like luteolin, curcumin, resveratrol. There's some others that act as zinc ionophores, where they pull zinc into the cells, where it can potentially be more effective in combating the virus. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yes, exactly. That's what I recommend on all of those.
Okay, gotcha. The other thing is vitamin D. So there's been a few studies now that have linked vitamin D insufficiency and deficiency to
higher
risk of dying from COVID-19. Have you seen any of that research, and what are your thoughts on vitamin?
Yes, I have, and vitamin D3 is on my list and of essential basic nutrients. And you can, of course, in our clinic, we test the patients for their levels. If they're deficient, if they're less than, if functionally deficient, let's say less than 40, then we give them an injection, a vitamin D3 injection of 50,000, sometimes 100,000, especially for older people, right away. And then we follow that with 5 to 10,000 a day and a burst of 50,000 oral a week. or if they're really deficient, if they're at 20 or 30, some patients are down to 10. And then we have them come in weekly for an injection of 50,000 for 1 month, and then retest them.
Gotcha. So do you think that implementing the list of strategies that you just mentioned, I mean, if you were to quantify it, and I know this is all speculative because we don't have any randomized controlled study, but if you were to quantify it in terms of how much do you think that this has the potential to reduce someone's risk of, obviously it doesn't reduce the risk of getting it per se, or maybe it does to some extent, but um, getting a severe symptoms and a severe trajectory of illness. Like if I have parents in their mid 70s, for example, if they implement all of these things, what could they expect about their, how much it would affect their risk of dying or getting severe symptoms from COVID-19?
Well, first of all, for people over 70, the mid 70s and older, like your parents, then you want to focus on the thymus. So that's zinc, but also other substances, natural substances that promote the thymic health, and their thymus function is so far down naturally already that they're a few supplements, a little bit of vitamin C is not enough, and to prevent infection or to hold back that wave of activity that come into their body. So I just that we'll be publishing in the first part of June an article on how to do that with your thymus, and I can send a copy, pre-publication copy to you if you'd like.
Thank
you. And then your question is what, I can't give a percentage. We can't quantify, but my experience, my clinical experience, and from what I could glean from the research, as you know, I read hundreds and hundreds of articles, and mainly I'm looking at mostly the Asian studies, because they're much more open to taking natural compounds and using them together in an integrated way. Of course, in China, they emphasize traditional Chinese medicine. And however, they've already done this with SARS in Hong Kong and in Guangzhou in South China. So what they found was that, and you notice that steroids are hardly used at all with this current COVID-19. That's because they had a disastrous results with steroids.
Corticosteroids.
In China. Mm-hmm. And so they saw dramatic improvement because they gave massive dosages intravenously, and they saved patients' lives, and they destroyed their bones and permanently.
Wow.
And the damage was so we couldn't afford to do that here. So you never hear a word about the use of steroids on this one.
Mm-hmm. Gotcha.
Right? Yeah. But you need to use anti-inflammatories to manage the inflammation.
What about something like nebulizing glutathione? Have you experimented with that? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah. So glutathione is an antioxidant, right, and a naturally occurring antioxidant, and giving patients an oxygen, pure oxygen, helps a little bit. It's easier because it's a passive. The little tube by their nose, it's a passive way of getting oxygen in, and that helps. And using a nebulizer carefully can help. It can also cause problems because you're inhaling with the mask completely over your nose and mouth, and it's creating a very fine aerosol. Right now, usually we use N-acetylcysteine, and that's used by traditional medicine. It has been for years to help thin the mucus. So that would be the first line, but in very small dosages. When people who use glutathione or high dosages of NAC cause a lot of lung damage and difficulty breathing.
By nebulizing it at high doses.
That's right. And for older people, there's certain people who have genetic sensitivity or susceptibility to cardiovascular effects from glutathione.
Mm-hmm.
So I would never recommend that to anyone over 70, 75 years old, maybe even 65.
Gotcha.
We don't know how to measure that or that and who would be susceptible, but you certainly don't want them going into getting their blood pressure up or irregular heart rate, which can happen.
Gotcha. What about melatonin? There's been some talk about this, deactivating I think it's the NLRP3 inflammasome that's instrumental in creating the cytokine storms. Do you have any thoughts?
Right. Now, melatonin plays a key role in the thymic function. So, and it has antioxidant effects and many other effects as well. So, taking melatonin is part of the protocols that I use. Now, the dosage is different from the standard sleep dose, which is usually 0.5 or 1 or maximum 3. For my patients, I'm using 10 or 20 milligrams for immune support and infection prevention.
Okay, got it. So any other tips as far as thymus gland optimization?
Yes, there are thymic peptides that are injectable, low dose injectables. There's thymic extracts, oral extracts, like from the New Zealand organic grass-fed glandular extracts. So usually we give thymus and spleen together. And yep,
And
bovine or from sheep.
is there research showing that those affect our thymus function? I know that's kind of a contested, controversial topic, where in conventional medicine, they don't accept the idea that ingesting glands of other animals helps optimize our own glands.
Right. They've been in use for decades, and there's what is soft research or evidence that support that, but it's not a pharmaceutical. So there's individual researchers and small studies.
Okay, but you do believe that it could be of benefit.
I believe so. We use it for older patients just to support healthy aging, and I'm not sure that it has a profound effect against an infection, but maintaining anything that you can do to maintain healthy thymic function during aging is, I think, important. I wouldn't prescribe thymus tissue or thymic injections or anything for younger people. That doesn't seem to make any sense.
Okay, so what's sort of your complete list of thymus optimization strategies? If you were to just list them off, I know you have a protocol that you're developing with more in-depth guidance, but what do you think are the biggest factors?
Could you repeat that?
What do you think are what's your list of strategies? You've mentioned a few already, but what's sort of the full list of strategies for thymus optimization?
Sure. So my list, I'm going to read it off to you, is a high micronutrient diet, restorative sleep, melatonin, supportive single nutrient and supplement cocktails like zinc, and I can read that list off in a moment. Balance your hormones and support your thyroid. Thyroid and thymus go well together. Same with the pineal and melatonin. And then the list of supplements that I recommend include zinc, vitamin C, vitamin A, selenium, thymic and spleen extracts, and astragalus.
Got it. Beautiful. Great list. You've mentioned a lot of key strategies and evidence-based ways to boost immune function. If somebody feels overwhelmed with all of this, what would you say, and this is my final question to you, what would you say are your, let's say, top 3 or top 5 most important pieces of this puzzle? Let's say someone is already eating a healthy diet, they're already exercising, they've already got basic nutrition, lifestyle stuff. handled, what's your top 3 or top 5 must-do strategies to prevent severe sickness from COVID-19?
Zinc, vitamin A, selenium, vitamin C.
Beautiful. Do you have any final words that you want to leave people with as far as what they should be focusing on right now?
Sure. I think the big idea is that you can bend the curve. You don't need to do something miraculous, or you just need 1%, 2%, 3%. It's a trajectory. So if you're bending it just enough, 1% over that trajectory, you'll do better, and you may survive. And from the research shows, the clinical research and the clinical data out of China inform us that, and some of the doctors who use IV vitamin C in the hospitals in New York inform us of that. They're not official studies, but the information is there. It's not wiping out a disease or getting a vaccine that clears the pathway for everybody. And that, you don't need that. You just need 1 or 2 or 3 or 7% to bend the curve in your favor.
Beautiful. Dr. Williams, brilliant as always. Thank you so much for sharing your wisdom with my audience. I think this is a critical message, and I'm 100% on board with that we really need to shift the focus from, in my opinion, flattening the curve to bending the curve. I'm not saying flattening the curve is not important. I'm not saying it wasn't a great goal to avoid overwhelming the hospitals. It absolutely was. But I really think that bending the curve deserves just as much, in my opinion, actually more attention than flattening the curve. And I think it's one of my biggest disappointments and things that gets me really riled up about what's going on right now is that within mainstream media, there's almost no attention being put on this at all. So thank you so much for sharing this very, very important message. I really appreciate it. If somebody's interested in contacting you, learning more about your work, or working with you directly one-on-one, where's the best place to reach out to you?
I would go to the website, and that's jewilliamsomd.com, and everything is there.
Beautiful. Dr. J.E. Williams, OMD, is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, drjewilliams.com. Sorry, Dr. J.E. Williams.
Well, I have 2 websites. One is drjewilliams.com. That's a clinical website. And the other is J.E. Williams OMD. That's where you can see all my pictures of 20,000 feet in the Andes and my work with the indigenous people and stuff like that.
Okay, wonderful. Great connecting with you again, my friend. And I feel we're probably scratching the surface. I think there's probably a whole bunch of other topics we could have delved into here. And maybe I'll have to have you on for a COVID-19 part 2, podcast number 4 with you. So really, it was a pleasure connecting with you. I look forward to the next time.
Thank you, Ari. Bye.
Hey there, this is Ari again. One more quick thing before you go. Just make sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel, The Energy Blueprint, and also make sure to subscribe to this podcast on your favorite podcast platform, whether that's iTunes or Stitcher or anything else. I hope you guys enjoyed this interview, and I will see you again next week.